To present to you today the results of the Kekst CNC COVID-19 opinion tracker. This is an opinion tracker that has been done. Can I see which slide is shown? Where do I see which slide is shown?
All right, hold on.
I would first like to explain to you about the methodology of this tracker. And we are in the second wave of having done this tracker.
Do you have a control?
I control here.
Yeah,
if it's
go ahead. Toward it. The other way. I think the other way.
No, maybe you move it.
Okay, I move it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So here you see that we did in 30, at the bottom left, you see 30th of March to 3rd of April, we did the first wave where we looked at UK, US, Sweden, and Germany. And now we did another second wave just from 27th of April to 1st of May, so just less than 2 weeks ago, where we added Japan. And in each country, we looked at 1,000 adults defined by being at the age of 18 or older. And we had quota and weights attached for gender, age, and region. So we have a very representative overview of the results. The margin of error is plus minus 3.3%. If we go to the next slide, we can see the 6 main global findings. I will give you an overview of the main global findings first and later go into the details. These 6 findings are as follows. Number 1, the public in all countries continues to prioritize health over the economy. The gap is narrowing close in Germany and Sweden, but still in each country, health is of higher priority than the economy according to our results. Global finding number 2, the concern about the virus is falling, but people expect it to take much longer and see an impact much longer than 1 month ago. Third, overall, in the 4 countries of the first wave, business support measures have been very positively received by the populations in these countries and have improved the view of the peoples of the economic and financial situations. But there's a big but, which is the finding number 4 highlighted here. In Japan, by contrast, the Japanese are very critical of the government and they are very deeply concerned about their economic and financial situation. Global finding number 5, consumer behavior will probably change even if a vaccine will be developed and globally rolled out. And 6, people overall want the economy to fundamentally change and not to return to the former state. If we move to the next slide, please. Here you have the 6 findings for Japan. We are in Japan, and this is the reason why we focus here on Japan, but we also focus on Japan because the findings for Japan are so striking in comparison to the other 4 countries. Number 1, like elsewhere, the Japanese are concerned about health risk, but overall, their concerns about the economic impact and job losses are even higher than anywhere else. Finding number 2, in Japan, there are 3 subgroups most impacted. These are low-income earners, these are young people, and female. And they are not only most impacted, they also show the strongest concern. Key finding 3 for Japan. The Japanese rate the actual support measures, business support measures by the government very, very low, far lower than in any other country. We see the figures in a second. 4th, as a result, most likely as a result, the Japanese are highly dissatisfied with the handling of the Japanese government, the handling of the coronavirus crisis. Again, very different from other countries. Finding number 5, Japanese also expect the consumer behavior to change drastically, even more than in other countries. And 6, the Japanese have the strongest wish of all countries for a fundamental change of the economy. Let's move into the concrete findings, and we start with a look at government decisions. You will always see in the next slides to come wave 1 and wave 2, meaning the survey results from 1 month ago and from 2 weeks ago. So you always see, if we look to the UK chart at the bottom left, you see a light color, which is the result of the first wave, and a dark color for the wave 2. For Japan, we only have results for wave 2, obviously. What you see here is we had asked the people, what should be the priority for the government? Should it limit the spread of the disease and the number of deaths, even if that means a major recession or depression, leading to business failing and many people to lose a job? Or the other way around, should they prioritize the economy? And you see here that overall, the public continues in all countries to prioritize health over the economy. However, the gap is narrowing, especially if you look at Germany and Sweden. The people having a higher emphasis on economy are quickly catching up. In UK, the figures are still extremely high, with 73% wanting priority on health. Japan is the second highest, with 60% saying that limiting the spread of the disease is more important than avoiding a recession. If we look a little bit closer, among the young people, the figure is only 50%. Among the people older than 65, it is 73%. They are the most concerned in Japan. The younger people, obviously, a little bit less. And people below 3 million yen only think 55% limiting spread is top priority number 1. Next slide, please.
People below the income of 3 million yen.
The annual income of 3 million yen is the border here, yes. If we move to the next slide, we see the level of concerns for several factors. And we ask our respondents to rate on a scale from 1 to 10 how much they are concerned about the impact of coronavirus. And those who answered 8, 9, or 10 are those highly concerned, and only those have added to the figures shown here. And you see that over time, compared to 1 month ago, in all countries, health and economic risk have declined. So, but other findings also show that the concerns about the economy overall are higher than the concerns about health. Especially in UK and US, there are still high concerns on business and economy. For Japan, we see very similar findings like for the US, with economic concerns being higher than financial concerns, not only from a macro point of view, economy and business with 74 and 68%, but even if it going beyond, be about the own impact, about the own job or own household finances, where Japan is very high with 46 and 43%. Let's look at the labor market on the next slide. Overall, people are worried about their jobs, especially in the US and in Japan, least in the UK and Germany. If you look to the bar on the right-hand side, you see that Japanese have already lost 10% of our respondents had already lost their job. And looking a bit deeper, we see the 3 groups that I mentioned before. Female, even the figure is 11% have lost their job so far. For those with an annual income lower than 2 million yen, the lowest income bracket, the figure is 13%. And for young people, 18 to 24 years, the figure is even 18% of people having already lost their job among our respondents. If we look to the left-hand side, we see whether the people expect to lose their job. So on the left-hand side, we have only looked at the answers of people who are still in working positions. And there, 39% of the Japanese expect to lose their job, much higher than in any other countries where the figures are between 11 and 23%. Again, a breakdown shows our most affected groups. Female, even 42% answer that they expect to lose their job. 25 to 34-year-old, 45%. And low-income earners, less than 4 million yen per year, 45%. Interesting, from a regional point of view, Kanto, here the area around Tokyo, is only 35%, while a region like Chubu, far away, the figure goes up to 46% of people expecting to lose their job. Interestingly, this 39% figure is relatively similar to the figure of non-regular workers in Japan, a figure that has increased over the last 20 years to about 35%, as we know. You also see that another record figure for Japan in the middle, 39% of our respondents expect their company to collapse, again, much higher than in any other country. Next slide, please. So, the government is expected to offer business support, and this business support is rated very highly in the 4 countries in our first wave: UK, USA, Germany, and Sweden. The figures there where people answer the government is giving business the support it needs is between 40 and 65% in the UK. And on the right-hand side, the question was, do you think that the money is getting through to the right business in need? The figures go down a little bit, but still they are high. The majority think so. You see on the very right-hand side in the shaded colors, the people who don't think that it reaches. If you look to the bottom, the figures for Japan, they are shocking. Japan, only 13% of our respondents said that they think the government is giving business the support it needs. And even 9%, you see it on the right-hand side, think that it reaches the business in need. This is probably the core finding for Japan of this survey. And this is why I want to give some more detailed figure. Business support, again, 13% is the overall figure. Among the people older than 65 years, only 5% of Japanese think so. Regionally, in Hokkaido, only 2% think so. Among the ultra-low income earners, below 2 million yen per year, only 2% think so. And interestingly, let's look at political affiliations. We also had asked our respondents for whom they would vote if tomorrow there were a federal election. LDP voters, the share is 23%, thinking that the government gives the right business support. Komeito voters, only 9%. And for the right-hand figure, only 17% of LDP voters agree to the statement, and again for Komeito only 9%. Next slide, please. Here you see the performance of the institutions seen by their people. And you see some direction reflection of the earlier findings in this slide. We asked our respondents, please indicate whether the activities over the last 2 weeks have increased or decreased your confidence in their ability, the government's ability to respond effectively to the crisis. Overall, you see for the 4 countries, except for Japan, positive figures for various institutions. The institution on the far left is the central government. And let's first look at the central government. So the figures for the central government are positive in all 4 countries or very slightly negative. However, for Japan, you see a bar of minus 52%. This is a net result. So there were 58% people saying, my confidence in the government handling this crisis decreased, and 6% said it increased. So all the figures here are net figures. 58% minus plus 6, minus 52%. And you see, if you look closer at this, that this is very different from the other countries. And again, I want to offer some more breakdown. Interestingly here, in this regard, male are even more critical than female, with a net 56 people, minus 56 saying so, compared to this minus 52. The net figure for people older than 65 is minus 65. In Hokkaido, it is minus 57. In Kanto, minus 51, slightly better. But again, for people with low income between 3 and 4 million yen, net minus of 63%. And interestingly, we also looked at the voters, people who vote for LDP. The figure is a net minus of 34%. So there were even 46% saying my confidence decreased over the last 2 weeks, and only 12% said it increased. We have also looked at other institutions, for example, the public health institutions, or here in Japan, the health ministry. In Japan, you see the figure to be minus 39, where other countries have figures of net figures of plus 8 to plus 47. Very, very different. Also, the confidence in the WHO in Japan is very negative, as you see, with minus 50, while all other countries, even in the US, have a positive overall result. Next slide, please. Let's look at the levels of influence. So the question was, how much influence do you think each of the following groups of people actually has or should have on national decisions made on coronavirus in your country? The yellow dot shows the actual influence, and the pink dot shows the should have influence, the wished for influence. And for all countries, as well as for Japan, which is shown here, people want to have scientists and public health experts and doctors and nurses, so the real expert, to have the most influence on national decision making. It's everywhere the same, also here in Japan, which we see on this slide. In Japan, the prime minister is also rated very highly, and interestingly, even people think he should have a bit more influence, which might come as a surprise. But if you go further down the line, there is a different result for politicians or for civil servants. There the people answered they should have less influence. So we might conclude, we must be careful, but we might conclude that the respondents are looking for a strong leadership by the prime minister, but not overall happy with the influence that politicians and civil servants do have. And this might be also an explanation why the approval rate of Prime Minister Abe still is relatively high, as recent surveys show. Next slide, please. How long will this crisis take? We ask the people what they expect, and here you see only the figures for the people who answered longer than a year or longer than 2 years. So you see that compared to the first wave 1 month ago, everywhere people expect the crisis to take much longer, also here in Japan. At the upper part, it is more the macro impact on the country, on the economy. The figures are between 49 and 87% of people expecting to take that the impact will take at least another year. Only the US is low with 43 to 50%. At the bottom, you see the impact on the individuals, on the household finance and the life. And for all countries, except for Japan, it's between 30 and 41%. Here, Japan breaks out and shows record highs of 50 and 56%. So again, there is not only a very strong concern of the impact on the personal life and on household finance, there's also an expectation that this impact will last very long, actually longer than in other countries. You can also say that Japanese people are more realistic because there is a concerning difference between the readings, the result at the bottom for the other four countries, for their individual impact and their expectations for the impact on the country. So obviously in other four countries, people think that the country and the economy will be very long impact, but they themselves are a bit more on a safer side. In Japan, it is very much matching, both for the country, for the economy, but also for people themselves. It's a very long expectation that we read from these figures. Next slide, please. Now we move to the future. We looked and we asked our respondents how they will change their behavior after the crisis. And we asked them, how will you change your behavior after all lockdown, or here in Japan, soft lockdown restrictions have been lifted? And we also asked them, how will you change your behavior after lifting of all restriction and an effective vaccine having been developed and rolled out globally? So basically being safe. And here you see not comparison of wave 1 of wave 2, but you see if you look to the far left for the figures for UK, you see the very far left chart showing the steep decline of the figure is 43%. This is the answer for the case that only restrictions are lifted, no vaccine, and the next figure of 23% is the figure when a vaccine is available. And the same for all other countries. Overall, you see here, and this is the main finding, people will change their behavior as compared to pre-crisis, even if there is a vaccine, and very strongly. It is a very consistent showing over all four elements we show here, which are travel by plane, eat out at restaurants, shop at supermarkets, and being outside. Only being outside, people expect to increase it. We are again looking at net figures. So there were people saying, I increase my behavior or I decrease it. And again, we see here the net percentage of figures of people who said they do it less or more than before. So for Japan, travel by plane, the Japanese will do it 26% on a net basis less, even if a vaccine has been developed. So let's look to the next slide because we have further indicators. The next slide looks at things like or whether people go to the cinema, work from home, go to large-scale public events like concerts and exhibitions, or travel abroad. And again, you see very consistent findings. Work from home is set to increase. In Japan, only a little bit on a net base, but again, consistent figures. Telework to increase, all other activities, cinema, event visiting, traveling abroad, even with a vaccine, to slow down. And finally, we have four more other elements, which is travel in my own country on the next slide, go to sporting events like football matches, use public transport, or use of car. And here again, you see consistent findings. Interestingly, for travel in my own country, Japanese expect not only to travel less abroad, but even to travel less within Japan domestically if there is a vaccine, net base of 16%. And use of car in Japan, people expect, very, very far right, expect that it's increasing. You see a certain concern about public transport. The final category, a changed economy. Here, our question was, do you want to see the economy return to how it was, or do you want more fundamental change, how the economy works? And you see that a majority in all countries want a fundamental change in how the economy works. On the right-hand side, these bars. Between 44% and 58% for Japan, our respondents said they want a fundamental change in the economy, and much less people answered that they would like a return of the economy to the state it was. But the focus on how this economy should look like, what are the priorities of our respondents, is a little bit fuzzy. Let's look at the next slide. So we ask them, what are the priorities that you want in the future economy and society to see? And the number one priority is to prepare for future pandemics and health threats. In Japan, there's a very strong figure of 24% answering this. So Japan is leading there. The second most answered point is looking after the most vulnerable in society. The figure for Japan is 15%, again, in line, relatively strong also in international comparison. Below, there are the 15% said get back to normal as quickly as possible. So we skip them here. But if we go to the upper right, there we have the funding and paying more of key workers, be it in healthcare or other sectors. Again, the Japanese with 12%, like in other countries, are having a very strong focus on this. All the other opportunities we were giving, our respondents were answered relatively little. And if we move to the final slide, we even see here at the upper left, the point of focus on climate protection. Remember the public discussion everywhere in the world, especially in Europe, but actually everywhere, about global warming and climate protection until the coronavirus struck. This climate protection does not seem to be on the mind of our respondents. Only 2 to 8% globally said that the future economy should put priority on this. In Japan, the figure is only 2%. So, summarizing, we see a big change from a climate or business-focused wish of an economy to a wish for a more caring economy and society. And there has been lots of discussion about ESG, economic, social governance recently. And this survey shows a strong switch or a strong move from the E, standing for environment, to the S of social in ESG. So a caring economy is what people at this moment globally look for. And you might summarize it from a business point of view, but also from a wider point of view. Solidarity today will mean revenues tomorrow. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to receiving your questions and further discussing it.
Okay, great. Jochen, thank you very much for the very fascinating presentation. Okay, we have about a half a dozen, 7 or 8 reporters registered online. So we're going to go to Q&A, and we're going to start with those who are pre-registered and who are actually standing by online. And please raise hand, not physically, but the raise hands on the software. So I will call your name, and please identify yourself and your affiliation if you can. So let's start with the one question, Jochen. Some of the data you gave more detailed like breakdowns and stuff. Are those data available to us anywhere?
If we go to the final slide of the presentation, which we have not shown, it gives a link to a global report of more than 30 pages, where you can find more detailed data. Maybe we can show this link one, so everybody can look at. You see there at the top, difficult to read in blue. It shows up here on the screen in blue. It is COVID-19 research at kekstcnc.com. This is an email where you can ask questions, but you have the link at the bottom on our website where people find very detailed data and also a page with Japan deep dive. Some of the breakdown by region, by income brackets are in these data, but of course there are more than 1,000 pages of data. So I'm happy to reply on an individual basis later on if there are questions on that.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's start with Ilgin. Ilgin, go ahead.
Hello, hi, this is Ilgin Yorulmaz. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Can you say who you're with? I mean,
yes. I'm Ilgin Yorulmaz. I'm a freelancer for BBC World Service Turkish, and thank you very much for the presentation. You have looked at several countries, which is a really original way of doing this. I think we've been talking a lot about Japan, but I still want to ask about Japan. Now, this crisis has definitely exposed the precariousness of Japanese economy and the labor. What do you think is the biggest mistake?
So Japan has not necessarily done anything extremely bad in this kind of acting, protecting the people. Other countries in Asia have also good readings in this regard. I think the reason leading to the big dissatisfaction of the people here are the economic support measures, because the economic concern is very high here in Japan. And if I would give 3 points where I see Japan lagging behind the other countries here, even lagging behind UK or the US, is it is very complicated to apply for business support. The business support is not necessarily cash payout, but tax credit schemes or loans. And thirdly, the money is not reaching the people. And this is of very high concern, especially for the small and medium enterprises, where people don't have a strong social safety net like in countries as Germany and Sweden. I hope this answers your question.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. We have Simon Danier from Washington Post.
Thanks very much. Very interesting survey. I've got a lot of questions, but I'll try and do a couple at the start, and then maybe we can come back to some later. I was curious actually about how you selected the people in the survey. First of all, how you selected the 1,000 people. I was also curious about the media reading in Japan, which seemed very low in terms of approval of the media. But I also just wondered whether you did any kind of follow-up conversations with people to get any sort of qualitative sense of why they were giving the answers, or whether there was only a quantitative kind of survey.
Three questions, happy to answer. If you look at the methodology slide, we have looked at 1,000 adults everywhere, and we applied quota and weights on gender, age, and region. So we have made sure that we have weighted by quota and age exactly the population data for gender, age, and region. So this is making this a representative and this very low margin of error of only 3.3%. We have not done follow-up qualitative talks with the people yet. As I just to remind, we have just finished on 1st of May doing this support. Sorry, I missed the second question in between. What was it?
I just noted the low number for the media.
Low number for media.
In Japan especially, yes.
In Japan in particular, but it is everywhere. And yeah. I think people replying to how much their confidence increased or decreased in media. Media is a very wide area. And we meanwhile have not only prime media like the Washington Post, but also lots of borderline new social media. And I think that in this area, we have a mixed view of people around the world about whether the media is really portraying the right facts and opinions. In many countries, people do not like the fact that facts and opinions are mixed into one and they cannot distinguish between this. So I think Japan does not stand out that much because this is a finding we have seen over all 5 countries. But of course, the reading here for Japan indicates that also here the Japanese people are looking for good, real facts and a very transparent reporting, and they feel not to get it overall. Again, we did not look and ask for certain publications or media organizations.
Okay, next, before we go into the next question, for those who did not pre-register for the press conference and who are dying to ask a question, here's the email address. Can you close up on this one? Here's the email address you can send your questions to. And I can't promise you, but if you have time to, I try to read out the question for you. So this is news@fccj.or.jp. So please send any questions to this email address. Okay, so we don't have any hands up from pre-registered reporters for now, but I have one question which was sent in by email. This is a question from Eurobiz Japan. Ahead of next year's planned games, assume Olympic Games, what government measures should citizens and business expect, such as mandatory telework programs, abandoning hanko stamps, or even rules on travel and commuting? What do you expect? And also, if you can, what do you think is needed in order to realize that for the game to happen next year?
I think the question can be divided into 2 parts. First of all, will the games happen? And I think this is nothing our respondents or I can answer here. But it's interesting if we go to page 14, the behavior after crisis, we had asked whether people intend to go to large-scale public events like concerts and exhibitions. And on the next page, we had asked them whether they want to go to a big sporting event like football match or the Olympics. And for all countries, even with a vaccine in place, the reading were negative. So this is indicating that the Olympics will face both in the build-up and the decision to hold the Olympics, and then in actually holding the sport event here in Japan, a challenge. And this is not only concise to the people here in Japan, but also to overseas visitors. Of course, we all know that sometimes there is perception even more important than reality. And you can only create a perception of a safe Olympic Games if you have in the build-up a very transparent communication about the situation in the country around the Olympics, and with very good and consistent communication about all the measures that will provide as safe as possible event. So this will be the challenge for the organizers on an international and also here Japan national level, to give this feeling and also the actual implementation of creating an as safe as possible environment. Because again, looking at these figures, even if we have a vaccine by the Olympics, and if all people have been vaccinated and there is no real medical concern about contracting coronavirus, the disease, still people have fear as a result out of this experience of the last 2-3 months, at least as of now. It might become less over time, but it might also not go away completely. Again, looking at the figures.
Okay, thank you. Also, one other thing is in your presentation, it's such a low sense of trust toward the WHO in Japan. Was there were there any explanation that why Japan has such a low esteem for the WHO?
No, unfortunately, I cannot give a qualitative explanation. The only thing that most of us are aware of is that there has been lots of reporting, lots of accusations from the US side against the WHO being overly dominated by the Chinese.
China.
And it could be that this is something that people here in Japan, who are much closer to China and look very different to China than the other 4 countries looked at, have factored into their response. But this is a pure speculation from my side. The figures do not give any qualification for why they answered this way.
Okay. Okay. We have another question from Andy Sharp of Nikkei. Can you go into more detail into what the Japanese government should do to help business more? Also, in your sector breakdown for Japan, why do banks appear to lag other essential industries?
If I first answer what should the government do, as I said before, the business support measures that are very important now in the next weeks, in the next months, must reach the recipients without time delay, without bureaucratic hurdles, as fast as possible. Here in Japan, we have an economy which, on top of the restaurants, bars, hotels affected and very much covered these days, with a strong manufacturing sector made up by small and medium enterprises. And they need support. It remains an important backbone of the Japanese economy. And my own country in Germany has a very different system. We have this so-called short-time work system, where the government pays 60% to people who are laid off by their companies for a certain period. Their salary is paid 60% by the government, for people with families even 67%, and sometimes up by the company. It allows these people to return to the workforce immediately when business picks up and they are needed again, or people can open up their business again. So this is more a structural, long-term, good example for Japan to strengthen an important part of its economy, the small and medium enterprises, but also important industrial companies, and getting business support out quickly without bureaucratic time delays is the immediate to-do.
Okay. Simon, you have another question? I saw your hand up.
I do. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So if you forgive me, I'm just going to sort of not challenge, but just sort of offer another thesis for the dissatisfaction that the Japanese people, and I'm sure you're absolutely right about the business support, which is really, really interesting. And I hadn't realized that, you know, how deep that dissatisfaction was. But some of the other polls show that people are very dissatisfied with the central government for not taking firm enough action. And they're actually more supportive of like the Tokyo government for trying to take firmer action. So that by taking weak action, you're prolonging the pain, if you like, and making the economic pain a lot worse. I just offer that as an alternative reading, if you like, and perhaps one that might explain why the health ministry's findings are also quite, credibility in the health ministry is also quite low in terms of things. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that as a potential contributor to dissatisfaction.
I think you're right. The very, very first slide we showed was about comparing emphasis on health or the economy. And again, there Japanese people, like in the UK, were very strict and saying 60% want an emphasis on health. And this is affirmative action. And what we have seen is a number of measures that were kind of staggered, but not showing a very clear direction and a very clear leadership set by the government. And this is a problem. I was referring to the very first chapter, number 1, where we had this figure of 60% of people wanting, first of all, to limit the spread, because Japanese people are very clever and smart, and they know that without a clear direction and clear measures, we cannot move to the next phase. And what we are currently seeing, this discussion about the exit strategy and how to do it differently, prefecture by prefecture, is not giving a very clear roadmap what people are looking for in any form of crisis, where clear leadership with clear guidelines and clear roadmaps have to be set. It's very difficult for all countries, but obviously people in other countries are seeing the direction given by their governments and the action taken by them in a more positive light.
Thank you.
Okay, Ilgin, you have another question? Okay, so this is going to be the last question. Ilgin, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to go back to that chart actually and ask you about Sweden versus Japan. Sweden being perhaps another country which is kind of like hands-off approach, like Japan, I would say. What do you think is the difference between Sweden and Japan, the public difference in the perception of the urgency of this crisis, the medical urgency of this crisis and the economic urgency, or are there any differences?
It's a very interesting question, because Sweden clearly takes a very different approach to dealing with a crisis in Europe. And this is the reason why we have added Sweden to the other countries, which are the largest economies among G7 countries, also where our company has the largest office, including Japan. But Sweden is interesting because they take such a very non-restrictive way and do it with a strong lead by the public health experts, to whom the people in Sweden obviously strongly look up and believe in what they are saying. And in Sweden, we have a very strong safety net, both health and social safety net, that they are with us now globally moving into, let's call it phase 2 of this crisis. There is a more distinguished approach at looking at the economy, and the people are feeling that the health risk is there, but it somehow can be managed. They trust their public health system in Sweden very much, so they want more a focus on the economy, because we are looking at a long recession in all of these 5 countries, like all around the world. This will not be over by the end of this year, and people in Sweden are having strong trust in their social and health system to look for the right business and economic decisions to be emphasized now. That would be my reading of this result.
Okay, dope.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we are running out of time, but it's been a quite fascinating presentation, Jochen. And let me show you the website, your address that you can check more details if you're interested in. Was it the end of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
At the end of the PowerPoint.
This one right here. Okay. Here you go. Okay. This is the. It takes time. Yeah. Okay. It's a bit hard to read, but you see the email address and also the web address of his company site. And if you have more questions, Jochen's personal email address is there as well. So and he's generous enough to say he will respond, answer your questions.
Sure.
So thank you very much for. Oh, I guess I need to go back to this picture. Yeah, I'm working as a moderator and also sort of a technical director today. So kind of one-man operation here. All right. So thank you very much for joining our press conference. And we have another 2 or 3 interesting press conferences lined up this week. So I look forward to meeting you guys there again. So again, thank you very much for coming to the press conference. And Jochen, thank you.
Thank you.
落としてください。